Mrs. Barker Bowles is a great friend of mine. I have a large number of friends. I'm terribly lucky to have so many friends who I think are wonderful.
Would you believe it if you heard that King Charles is caught in another cheating scandal? Yes, you heard that right. After years of facing public backlash for betraying Princess Diana for Camilla, Charles has done it again at 76. This time, whispers speak of a mystery woman, someone no one expected. Camilla, once calm and loyal, has finally exploded in fury, her patience broken. Why would Charles repeat the same mistake after all these years? Could this betrayal destroy their marriage forever? The long table in the palace dining room often stood half empty. At its head sat Queen Camilla, her plate untouched, her eyes wandering to the empty chair beside her. "His Majesty is attending to national matters," the butler would say gently, lowering his eyes as if the words themselves were fragile. Camilla smiled politely, but deep down the words stung. National matters. How many times had she heard that excuse? At first, she accepted it. After all, he was the king, and duty had always come before comfort. But as the weeks turned into months, the pattern never changed. The clinking of silver against porcelain echoed too loudly in the grand dining hall. Meals stretched in silence, the queen surrounded by staff who tried to hide their unease. She had grown used to his absence, yet a shadow of loneliness followed her through every corridor. The palace felt colder, its walls whispering secrets she could not name. Behind her, the staff exchanged glances. They had noticed the king's unexplained late returns, his hurried departures, the way his schedule often changed without notice. Sometimes he returned past midnight, his expression unreadable, offering only a tired smile in the same line. It was a long day. Camilla never pressed. She had been through too much to cling or demand. Still, a quiet ache settled in her heart. She longed for the simple joy of shared meals, laughter, and company, things that once seemed possible but now slipped away like sand. Some nights she wandered the halls, her footsteps echoing. Every closed door seemed to hold a secret. Every servant's lowered voice carried a hint of something unsaid. She told herself it was nothing, just the price of life as queen. Yet the question lingered, heavy and unshakable. Was the king really buried in state affairs, or was there another reason for his constant absence? The whispers began quietly, like a breeze moving through closed rooms. Palace aides spoke in hushed tones, careful not to be overheard. Rumors trickled in from courtiers and old friends, stories of the king being seen in places where duty could not explain his presence. Camilla caught fragments here and there. A lady-in-waiting mentioned seeing him step out of a car late at night. A guard spoke of unusual meetings beyond palace walls. Each time, Camilla dismissed it with a tired wave of her hand. "People will always talk," she said softly, convincing herself as much as anyone else. She knew the crown carried endless gossip, and the throne had never been free of scandal. Why should this be any different? Still, the whispers persisted. Some dared to suggest there was a woman involved, someone mysterious who had captured his time and attention. Camilla refused to believe it. She told herself Charles was 76, far too burdened with duty, far too exhausted by life to chase after such folly. He was the King of England, his every move watched, his every word recorded. Could such a man risk everything for a secret? At night, she sat in her chambers, staring into the quiet glow of the fireplace. She remembered the storms of the past, the years when she herself had been at the center of whispers. She pushed the memories away, telling herself she had outlived that era. "Not again," she murmured under her breath. "Not after everything we built." But the palace had its own rhythm. The staff noticed, the corridors carried echoes, and even the courtiers began to lower their voices when she walked by. Something was shifting, something she could no longer ignore. The whispers grew louder, like a tide creeping closer to shore, and while Camilla tried to hold her head high, her heart grew restless, haunted by shadows she could no longer dismiss. But what happens when whispers become too loud to ignore? The palace was still warm with the glow of their wedding anniversary. Flowers filled the rooms, and the scent of champagne lingered in the air. Camilla had smiled through the day, holding on to the thought that after so many years, they had reached this milestone together. But a few nights later, as she sorted through Charles's study, her eyes caught something unusual. A small velvet box lay half hidden beneath papers on his desk. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a piece of jewelry, delicate and modern. A bracelet, thin but sparkling, crafted with a design too young, too intimate, too unlike anything she wore. Her breath caught. This was not a diplomatic gift, not the kind of token that passed through royal hands so often. It was personal, too personal. She closed the box quickly, her hands trembling. Her mind raced, but her heart already knew. This gift was not for her. On their anniversary, when she had received nothing more than a polite toast and a smile, he had hidden away a treasure meant for someone else. The silence in the room pressed down on her. The ticking clock felt louder than ever. She set the box back exactly as she found it, though her chest felt heavy. The walls of the palace, once her safe place, seemed to close in around her. At dinner the next evening, she glanced at Charles across the table. He spoke of politics, of meetings and engagements. She nodded, her face calm, but inside, her thoughts circled back to that velvet box. Was it a gift, waiting for another woman? Why had he hidden it so carefully, so close, yet so far from her eyes? The anniversary that had filled her with quiet pride now felt like a cruel trick. The celebration was tainted, the memory of their smiles broken by a secret she was never meant to see. Who was the gift meant for, and why was it hidden from her eyes? After the discovery, Camilla could not rest. Each day she carried the image of the bracelet in her mind, its sparkle haunting her like a whisper she could not silence. She began watching him more closely. At breakfast, she noticed how quickly he checked his phone, holding it near as if afraid it might slip from view. His clothes, once chosen with little care, now seemed sharper, his ties more carefully matched, his cufflinks polished. "New look, Your Majesty?" she asked lightly one morning, her tone calm though her eyes studied every detail. He only smiled and reached for his tea, offering no explanation. Camilla turned to the staff, slipping gentle questions into casual conversations. "Did His Majesty return late last night?" she would ask, or "Where was the meeting held this afternoon?" The answers were polite but vague. The palace had learned long ago to protect its king. The more she searched, the more powerless she felt. She was queen, yet the truth danced just beyond her reach. Each corridor she walked seemed to whisper lies. Each servant's glance held something unspoken. She spent long hours alone, replaying every moment, every excuse. She wanted to dismiss her doubts, to believe in loyalty, but the bracelet had carved too deep a wound. At night, she lay awake, listening to the faint echo of his footsteps when he returned late. He slipped quietly into bed, and though he rested beside her, she felt miles away from him. Camilla had once been strong, once certain of her place at his side, but now, for the first time as queen, she felt powerless within her own palace. The weight of the crown did not protect her from the ache of betrayal. Her search for answers had only deepened the silence between them. Still, she knew she could not stop. The truth was there, somewhere, waiting to shatter everything. Would Camilla's search for the truth lead her to a heartbreak she already knew too well? The quiet of the evening was broken when Camilla entered Charles's study. She carried the small velvet box in her hand, her grip firm though her heart raced. He looked up from his papers, startled by her sudden presence. "You forgot something," she said, her voice low as she placed the box on the desk between them. Charles froze. His eyes flicked from the box to her face, searching for the right words. "It's nothing," he muttered, shifting in his chair. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nothing." She opened the box, letting the bracelet catch the light. "This doesn't belong to me." "So tell me, Charles, who does it belong to?" His hand tightened around the arm of his chair. He tried to laugh, tried to wave it away as if it were a mistake. A gift, A diplomatic gesture. You wouldn't understand. Don't lie to me, Camilla snapped, her voice rising for the first time. The walls of the study seemed to tremble with her anger. I have lived this story before, Charles. I know what it means when the truth hides in the shadows. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. His hesitation was louder than any confession. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Camilla felt a sharp ache in her chest, echoes of Diana's pain replaying in her mind. Once, she had been the other woman standing in the shadows. Now, she was the wife facing the same betrayal. Her eyes burned, but her voice stayed firm. After everything, after all these years, this is what you give me. Charles looked down at the desk, unable to meet her gaze. The air between them hung thick, filled with anger, sorrow, and a truth neither of them dared to fully speak aloud. Would the Queen's fury explode privately, or would the world soon see cracks in the royal marriage? Her name came to Camilla like a whisper carried through the corridors, Lady Isabella Marchand. A widow, elegant and composed, known for her charm in charity circles. She had always been near the royal family, a face familiar in the background, but never one to cause suspicion. Isabella was in her early 60s, graceful yet vibrant, with a presence that drew people in without effort. She and Charles had known each other for decades, their paths crossing at countless events. To many, she was simply an old friend, a trusted companion in public service. But behind the polished smiles and polite greetings, something had shifted. Their friendship, once harmless, had taken root again in ways unseen. It began with quiet conversations after charity meetings, then letters exchanged under the guise of duty. Slowly, carefully, it grew into something more, a bond hidden in stolen hours. Those who noticed spoke of how Charles seemed lighter in her presence, how his eyes lingered when she spoke. Their connection carried a familiarity, an ease born of years past, yet rekindled with new fire. For Camilla, the discovery cut deeper than the bracelet. To know the face, the name, the history, it was almost unbearable. She had once been the secret herself, standing where Isabella now stood. The irony pierced her like a blade. Isabella, with her refined grace and quiet charm, was not a stranger to Charles's heart. She was someone who had always been near, waiting on the edges of his life until time and circumstance opened the door again. Camilla's mind swirled with questions. How long has it been? How many times had they met while she sat waiting alone in the palace? The whispers were no longer faceless. The rival had a name, a history, a story tied to Charles's own. But how deep did their bond run, and how long had this secret romance been unfolding? Camilla sat alone in her chamber, the silence pressing in on her like a heavy cloak. The fire in the grate crackled softly, but it gave no comfort. Her mind replayed the bracelet she had found, the whispers in the corridors, and now, Isabella's name. Each memory twisted inside her chest like a knife. Yet the sharpest pain of all was the déjà vu, the cruel reminder of a past she thought had been buried forever. Once, she had been the shadow. She had been the one people whispered about in hushed tones, the woman whose presence haunted Princess Diana's heart. She had known what it felt like to be the secret, the stolen glance across a crowded room, the letter hidden away, the meeting no one was supposed to see. Back then, she had told herself it was love, that fate had bound her to Charles and no force on earth could break it. But now, the roles were reversed. She was no longer the other woman. She was the wife, the queen, the one left sitting at an empty table while another captured his heart in silence. The irony cut deep, a mirror reflecting her own sins back at her. For the first time, she felt the wound from the other side. Her thoughts drifted to Diana, the late princess who had carried her sorrow with a quiet grace, her smile hiding the storm beneath. Camilla had watched her from a distance back then, knowing she was part of the pain Diana carried. Now, years later, she wondered if the princess had once sat as she did now, staring at the walls of a grand palace, feeling smaller than the world believed her to be. "Is this how she felt?" Camilla whispered, her voice trembling in the emptiness of the room. Is this the weight she carried all those years? Tears filled her eyes, though she quickly brushed them away. Queens were not meant to weep, yet tonight the crown on her head felt hollow. The title she had fought so hard to claim now little more than a burden. The grandeur of her position could not shield her from the sting of betrayal. Her chest tightened with every thought of history repeating itself. Once, she had believed she was above the whispers, that her love for Charles made her untouchable. But now she realized no crown, no title, no history could save her from the ache of being betrayed. The question burned in her mind, refusing to let her rest. Would she follow Diana's path and cover her pain in silence, allowing the betrayal to live in shadows? Or would she, unlike the princess before her, raise her voice and fight back, refusing to let herself be broken? The fire flickered low, shadows stretching across the chamber. Camilla's heart beat heavily in the silence. She was no longer sure if she had the strength to endure, but she knew one thing for certain. The story was not over yet. Would Camilla allow herself to become silent like Diana once did, or would she fight back? The storm finally broke one night inside the palace. Camilla's fury, bottled for weeks, spilled out in a torrent that shook the walls. She burst into Charles's study, her voice sharp, her hand slamming the velvet box onto the desk once more. "No more lies," she cried, her tone cracking. "Do you think I will stand by and watch you make a fool of me?" Charles rose from his chair, his face pale. "Camilla, listen. Listen." Her laugh was bitter, her eyes filled with fire. "I listened for years." I looked the other way. Not this time. She slammed the door so hard the portraits trembled. Staff in the hall exchanged nervous glances, the sound of raised voices carrying through the corridors. Servants paused, ears straining, as the queen's fury echoed down the palace walls. "If the world must know, then let them," Camilla shouted. "I will not protect you from your own choices." Charles's voice grew desperate. It wasn't love, it was loneliness. "Duty consumes me, Camilla. I sought comfort where I should not have." But his words only deepened the wound. Her anger fed on the confession, on the weakness of his excuses. "You dare speak of duty when you betray me in the shadows?" she shot back, her voice breaking. "You chose this. Don't blame the crown." The silence after was heavy, broken only by the faint sounds of footsteps retreating quickly from outside the door. The palace staff had heard enough, and whispers were already slipping into the night. Could this royal storm remain behind palace walls, or was scandal about to break loose? The walls of the palace trembled, not with noise, but with fear. Advisors rushed from one office to another, their whispers sharp, their faces pale. A storm had entered the monarchy, and it threatened to tear apart its carefully built image. "Control the story before it controls us," one senior aide muttered, papers clutched tightly in his hands. Drafts of official statements piled up, each one softened, polished, and rewritten to hide the truth. Yet no matter how polished the words looked on paper, they could not erase the sting of betrayal already spreading beyond the gates. The press had caught wind of something bigger than routine palace drama. Tabloids screamed with bold headlines, suggesting the king had a secret companion. Pictures of Charles leaving events late at night only fueled the fire. Reporters camped outside palace walls, ready to catch even the smallest slip of emotion from the royal family. Inside, tension grew. Staff avoided eye contact with Camilla, who walked through the halls with a silent fury. She was the queen, yet she felt like a woman cornered, her heart on display for the world to dissect. Charles, meanwhile, retreated into meetings with his advisors, insisting the monarchy's image must be saved. "This is about duty," he said firmly, though his voice trembled beneath the weight of his own choices. The palace had survived wars, abdications, and scandals before, but could it survive this, an echo of Diana's pain, now reborn in Camilla's sorrow? Could palace spin doctors really bury a story born of secrecy and betrayal, or was the truth already too strong to silence? Camilla had been silent long enough. For weeks, she had swallowed her pain and kept her composure, but inside the fire grew hotter. If Charles thought she would quietly endure humiliation, he was wrong. The Queen had endured too much already to be reduced to a shadow in her own palace. Her chance came during their next public appearance. The cameras caught every detail, and Camilla made sure the world saw the truth. She walked beside Charles, her crown steady, her gown elegant, but her body language told another story. She did not look at him. She did not brush his arm. Her smile was thin, fixed more for duty than affection, and her hands stayed tightly folded before her. It was subtle, but the message was clear. Something had broken, and she would not pretend otherwise. Reporters noticed at once. "Did you see the way she turned from him?" one whispered as photographs flashed across the evening papers. The public began to sense that the Queen's silence was not weakness. It was the beginning of her fight. Behind the grand walls of the palace, Camilla's voice grew sharper. With a trusted aide by her side, she let her thoughts spill out. "If he thinks he can humiliate me, he's mistaken," she said firmly. It was not a cry of despair, but a vow. Soon after, quiet hints began to appear in the press. Anonymous whispers about strain in the royal marriage, details too precise to be dismissed, too close to be ignored. Reporters who once pitied her now began to admire her strength. Charles, uneasy with the shift, tried to reach her in private. "I never meant to hurt you." "I was lonely on duty," he confessed, his voice heavy with guilt. But Camilla had heard excuses before. His words no longer softened her heart. She answered not with anger, but with silence, and that silence wounded more deeply than any argument could. Her rebellion was not loud. It was careful, calculated, almost elegant. She began choosing engagements where Charles was absent, her presence commanding attention on its own. During speeches, her voice carried a new strength, firm and edged with steel. She dressed with purpose, every detail speaking of confidence and power. Each gesture told a story. She would not be overlooked. She would not be the patient wife any longer. Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Some wondered if the Queen was preparing to break away, to step out from her king's shadow for good. Others believed she was waging a quieter war, not for escape, but for triumph, determined to claim victory over her rival and remind Charles and the world that she could not be replaced. Camilla had turned her pain into resolve. What began as betrayal was now becoming a test of strength, and this time she was not going to lose. So, do you think Camilla was setting herself free from Charles? Or was she fighting a silent battle to win against the shadow of another woman? Let's find out. When Lady Isabella's name surfaced, the calm world she had carefully built crumbled overnight. For years, she had walked gracefully through royal charity events, blending into the background with her quiet elegance. Now, the same elegance became her curse. Newspapers splashed her picture beside King Charles's, their headlines shouting betrayal, love affairs, and secrets hidden from the Queen. At first, Isabella tried to stay strong. "It will fade. They will move on to another story," she whispered to herself, clutching a teacup in trembling hands. But the world did not move on. Every day, reporters crowded her gates. Every evening, more rumors appeared in glossy magazines. Strangers stared in shops, whispers followed her on the streets, and friends she once trusted stopped calling. Her past, once private, was dragged into daylight. Details of her long friendship with Charles were picked apart. Old photographs at charity galas, kind words exchanged during speeches, even the innocent letters she once sent were twisted into proof of something deeper. The public no longer saw her as a widow devoted to causes. They saw her as the woman who dared to stand between the king and his queen. Unable to bear the pressure, Isabella pulled back from public life. Curtains stayed drawn in her home. Invitations to events were quietly declined. Her once warm laughter grew silent, leaving only the hollow sound of isolation. Inside the palace, Camilla read every headline. Each article stung, not only because of the scandal but because her own life was on display. The Queen's pride was torn in two directions. There was a bitter satisfaction in seeing Isabella's world collapse. Her rival had been dragged into the light, judged and cornered. Yet alongside that satisfaction was humiliation. The world now saw Camilla not as a queen in control, but as a wife betrayed. Late at night, she sat in her private chambers staring at the golden walls. "They think I'm a fool," she muttered softly. The irony was sharp. Once she had been the woman whispered about behind Diana's back. Now she was the wife carrying the pain, living in the same shadow she had once helped to create. Charles avoided her gaze at dinner. Silence stretched across the table, heavy and suffocating. The palace staff walked lightly, their faces careful masks. Everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. Camilla's emotions twisted with each passing day. She wanted to feel victorious, to believe Isabella's fall was her triumph. But victory felt empty when the price was her own dignity. For every whisper against Isabella, there was a louder laugh about the king who could not keep his heart steady. And that laugh always circled back to her. The palace could try to silence the noise, but Camilla's heart heard it clearly. A rival had been broken, yet her own marriage was now cracked for all to see. Would Isabella's downfall ease Camilla's wounded pride, or had the scars already cut too deep for healing? The palace stood as grand as ever, but inside its walls the air was heavy with doubt. King Charles was 76, his health more fragile than in years past, and now his reputation bore the scars of scandal. Advisors met in hushed circles, weighing not just his duties but his very ability to remain strong in the eyes of the people. On television, experts debated with sharp voices. Some said the king's sense of duty would carry him through, that he would endure storms as his mother once had. Others questioned whether the crown had finally lost its shine, suggesting the monarchy was slipping into an era of weakness it might not survive. Camilla watched these discussions from her private room, their words echoing louder than the sound of her own thoughts. She had spent years fighting for her place, carrying the weight of public scorn and eventually stepping into the role of queen with her head high. But now she wondered if it was worth the battle. At night, Charles tried to reassure her. "The crown must survive, Camilla. No matter what happens, it must endure," he told her quietly. But his voice was tired, his eyes lined with the weariness of a man who knew the truth was catching up with him. Camilla studied him in those moments and saw not just the king, but the man she had loved and fought for. Yet love seemed tangled with disappointment. Could she still stand by him, smiling before the cameras while her heart carried so much pain? Or was it time to think of herself, to protect her dignity before it was lost completely? Public appearances became a test of will. They stood side by side at ceremonies, their crowns gleaming under the light, but anyone looking closely could see the distance. The warmth once visible in stolen glances was gone, replaced by polite gestures and practiced smiles. The people noticed, the press noticed, and Camilla herself could not ignore it. Whispers in society circles painted her in two ways. Some said she would never leave, her crown too heavy to abandon. Others whispered that she might one day quietly break away, showing the world she would no longer play the part of a loyal queen in a broken marriage. The monarchy's image teetered, not just because of Charles's mistakes, but because the unity of the crown seemed fragile. It was no longer only about a king and his duty. It was about a marriage tested in the public eye, a partnership that now carried cracks too deep to hide. As Camilla stood at the palace window, watching the flag ripple in the wind, she wondered if this was the beginning of the end. Could the monarchy survive the storm, or would it unravel before her eyes? So, is this the last chapter in Charles and Camilla's turbulent love story, or only the beginning of a royal mystery?